Oh, well, we are back from the weekend. How did you spend yours this weekend? Maybe taking advantage of the nearly 2 feet of new snow at Bogus Basin that they've collected over the last week? Maybe you laid around and did nothing because you're hoping for an early spring weekend and that really didn't happen. Well, according to turnout numbers from Idaho's GOP, a lot of you were doing the latter, especially registered Republicans and your participation in the presidential caucus on Saturday. A lot of you opted to, well, basically do nothing, to not show up, even though the Idaho GOP called it a successful, quote, re-enfranchisement of Idaho Republican voters after the cancellation of the presidential primary. But were Republican voters re-enfranchised? Did they feel free again to participate in picking a presidential candidate after having their rights to do so returned to them? Which was overwhelmingly won by Donald Trump, by the way, with 85% of the vote. Okay, so this is what Rhonda wanted to know about this. What percentage of registered Republicans attended the caucus, and how does it compare to past presidential primary turnouts? Well, Rhonda, it was nowhere near the margin of victory for the former president, but what if we told you the turnout was a lot lower than it was the last time Idaho's majority party held a presidential caucus?
You can find several posts on social media about the number of people who showed up or didn't show up on Saturday. Like Nick Martin, who shared this about 12:30, 30 minutes after the doors opened. In Lowell Scott Middle School's gymnasium, Nick said, "This is what voter suppression looks like. This is supposed to represent 7 precincts." Well, looking at District 15 numbers, where as of January of this year, there are supposedly just under 14,000 registered Republicans. And according to the GOP website, 885 ballots were boxed, for a total of just 6.4% of District 15 Republicans. Similar sites in District 16. 2 locations, but just 746 decided to show up out of a little more than 11,000 allowed to do so. That's a turnout rate of 6.7%. And what about District 17? Well, Natalie Fleming posted this video showing the relatively low number of ballots being dumped on a table and about to be counted. And Natalie's correct. There are more than 10,000 registered Republicans on this part of the Boise bench. But just 623 total votes were tallied. That's just a 5.8% participation. So, in all of Ada County, with more than 146,000 registered Republicans and fewer than 10,000 taking the time out of their Saturday for the presidential caucus, that's only about 6.6% taking part in a county that carries the most Republicans in Idaho.
Okay, so Rhonda wants to know how that compares to previous primaries for the GOP. But how about we just go apples to apples instead, since primaries and caucuses, well, they're not the same thing. To do that, we got to go back to 2012, the one and only time Idaho's GOP did a caucus and was part of Super Tuesday when it did. Saturday, this past Saturday that is, with nearly 600,000 registered Republicans in Idaho, not even 40,000 took part in the caucus. That's only about 6.8%. Now, back in 2012, based on 2013 numbers from the Secretary of State's website, Idaho only had roughly about 230,000 registered Republicans, and more than 44,000 jumped into the caucus party 12 years ago, which is about 19%. Still a low number compared to how many people show up for primaries historically, which is around 20 to 25%. But this time around, only about a third of those people that showed up in 2012 showed up for 2024, 6.8 versus 19%. Not really a good one, but for some perspective, Iowa Republican Caucus in Iowa 2 months ago, they had their lowest voter turnout in more than a decade, which is less than 15%. Idaho holding a March caucus to make it relevant in the national picture for picking a president, that part still up for debate, especially considering no candidates stepped foot in the gem state and fewer than 40,000 decided for the nearly 600,000 they represent, which some critics point out was kind of the point. Okay, we did try to ask Chairwoman Dorothy Moon about all of this, get some questions answered about, well, was this a success, as you put it before? But as usual, we are still waiting for a response.